Cineboys to Cinemen, episode 45.
45
episodes deep. Ooh. Hope you're well, wherever you are, whatever you're doing. This week, The Iron Claw.
Yes.
A wrestling film.
Indeed.
Cineboys first.
Cineboys first, and my third ever wrestling film that I've ever watched. There not being many.
No, I was going to say, the third one you've ever seen, it's probably not far off the actual total amount of wrestling films that exist at the moment.
Yeah,
at least in Western audiences, or Western cinema, as far as I can think.
Yeah, and we've established last week that the Scorpion King doesn't count as one. So,
despite your best efforts to include it in the discussion.
I will be talking about it extensively for about an hour, but yeah, there we go.
It's going to be a longie.
Yeah.
It's going to be a longie.
Well, I feel like it's a film where you wrestle with your emotions a lot because it's such a inspirational story.
Yeah, definitely.
True.
We should point out that soothing, calming voice is none other than Monsieur Lee Markham, who's joined us for this week.
Back again. Third time's the charm.
Thank you very much for having me, guys.
Anytime.
Sacre bleu, as a Monsieur might say. Apologies to the French.
That's the John Wick. No, that's Sacre Coeur, isn't it? Sorry.
Yeah.
That really didn't land the way I'd hoped. I might keep this in, you know.
Yeah.
Listen, what's important is it's trying and shooting for the stars, and I feel like, Cineboys to Cinemen, that's what you're always aspiring to do.
Yeah.
As would the Scorpion King.
Exactly. Yeah. As this is a wrestling film, I think it was like a sort of perfect opportunity to discuss not only other wrestling films, a limited pool, as we previously mentioned, but wrestling itself. Modern wrestling is not something I know a great deal about, but I am very much someone that holds sort of 90s, early noughties era wrestling very much close to the heart.
And
it was too much of a good opportunity to sort of pass by, really, I think.
Oh yeah, definitely. Yeah, I mean it's kind of. And also, this has kind of been tipped as a sort of an Oscar film for a while now, and I was intrigued by it from the cast alone. I remember seeing the first poster, and whilst I don't have any sort of personal reverence for wrestling that goes beyond, the enthusiasm of you guys is kind of bleeding onto me a little bit, I was intrigued by the film nonetheless. So,
agreed.
Yeah, exactly.
And it just made sense to have Coventry's very own car park wrestling champion right here to help us wade through the complex web that is the professional wrestling industry.
Well, ultimately, also thank you for acknowledging my legitimate championship. I offered opportunities for people to come and challenge me in my Coventry Car Park Wrestling Championship bout. I lingered around many a car park in Coventry, shirt off, oiled up.
God.
Now, sadly, I'm not actually allowed back home to Coventry.
Because your Ford Escort got repossessed, was that right?
Yes.
Using it as an arena also is a bold move.
Yeah.
I mean, Vince McMahon, it's an idea he should take on board.
Yeah.
I know he's probably quite busy with other things at the moment.
Yeah, I think so. I think ultimately the way the Midlands Police saw it is a guy sweating profusely, naked, next to his Ford Escort in a Coventry car park. So how can you compete with that?
It's political correctness gone mad.
Yeah, exactly.
I think agree with that.
You're wanting glory and they're wanting you to leave the city.
Chased out.
Lost your Jordan's Country Crisp sponsorship as well.
Yeah. I mean, I think that...
Sorry to just highlight that for no reason at all.
Yeah. Well...
Mickey Molly's down.
Well, the thing was, that wasn't a legitimate kind of sponsorship. I was just kind of, at the time, living out that Ford Escort, so I was just kind of making clothes out of used wrappers of Jordan's Crisps.
Yeah.
Expensive, that. It's not cheap cereal.
It was, honestly. I mean, ultimately that's why I was living in my car, really.
I suppose it is a very large amount of sort of protein and nutrients to pack into quite a small space. So
honestly, it was a very confusing time, and I think probably the quicker we move on from it, the better.
I agree. Yeah. Outro? No, intro over, not outro.
Yeah, that's it.
No, that's it. Finished. Yeah. Shall we finish the intro?
Yes.
Yeah. Questing the cinematic void. So before we took into wrestling films and of course Iron Claw itself,
Yeah.
I think it's well worth talking about wrestling as a sport or as entertainment.
And I guess
sports entertainment.
how does it lend itself to cinema? So obviously you've got boxing, which is infinitely more popular in terms of films, but like, you know, the few that do exist, how have they sort of successfully translated it? Maybe.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And as a phenomena, I just think it is undoubtedly one of the most bizarre sort of forms of mainstream entertainment I can think of.
Yeah, completely. I mean, I'm coming from a place where I'm not, as I've already said, like it's not really my cup of tea. I don't know how it started. I'm sure you guys do, but like, has it always been around?
Yeah, I think it's been around since like at least like the turn of the 20th century. Yeah, I think it originated in kind of like circuses and stuff like that, and I think it must have come out of a kind of like almost like the strongman sort of kind of period. And I think weirdly, I think it's the only almost like circus-based kind of entertainment that's, I mean, it's completely devoid of circus now in terms of like visual, I guess, but like it
embodies the spirit of it, I think.
Definitely, it's definitely what you would describe as a quite carny sort of industry, and quite a carny. It's that kind of like, you know, it's still trying to in a way con the audience, like tricking them into believing that, you know, as much as the curtain's been lifted nowadays and people are aware enough, but making people believe that these people in the ring are actually having a fight, and trying to make it as kind of believable or entertaining or as, you know, like fantastical as possible for people to, you know, pay for it.
Yeah. It's all about it. I mean, this is kind of touched on in the Iron Claw quite a lot, but it seems to be about winning over a crowd, right? So it's not necessarily like you choose who you are supporting based on either like a geographical advantage or like, you know, if your hometown or something. It seems to me like it's a performance which wins you over, and you can kind of, and that is how they rise the ranks. Is that right?
I mean, I think you're partially right. I do think geographical location does play a role.
I mean, certainly Texas and
I think if there's a wrestler from a certain area, they're gonna garner a lot of support just by that basis if they're performing in that. Place in which
if they're like the hometown hero, or like
that's a big thing, I think.
And there's a big, you know, the foreigner or the outsider is the bad guy.
Yeah.
Oh god,
right.
yeah.
And they'll play that up. You'll have the bad guys who are either like over the top, you know, in quotation marks, foreign bad guy, or they'll use a lot of the bad guy will be in their kind of town and go like, oh, I hate being here in Texas, you're all a bunch of hicks,
right? And
he's trying to get the crowd as angry as possible, because then when they're hopefully defeated, it makes the hero kind of better.
Okay. They've defeated the sort of invading force, I suppose.
Yeah. And it's not always that. There's different and the terms they tend to use would be like the bad guy will always be called a heel. You have a heel.
And
then the hero will be a face. So I just want to say that now in case I start using a few of these phrases.
Heel and face, right?
Yeah. Okay. Face is a good guy, heel is bad guy. In case I start using those and you're like, what the hell is he on about? It's very much that. It's being the best is not necessarily about being the tough. It's about making the audience care for you, and that's whether you're a good guy or a bad guy. What you don't want is somebody being indifferent. Like
Right, okay. Yeah.
If that answers, sorry, I think I went on a bit too long there.
So, like, the worst thing to be is mediocre,
yes.
I suppose. And that's similar for I feel the same about films.
Yeah.
I think the worst kind of film is the mediocre film, like Ant-Man and that latest Ant-Man film. Like that was possibly, I don't know why it sticks out as one, like just an intensely mediocre experience.
Oh god, yeah.
Because when you go too far the other way of films being bad, you can kind of laugh at them, and there's a kind of almost a community spirit about it.
Yeah, totally. Yeah.
To be indifferent to something is possibly, I guess, the ultimate sin.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think that would be fair. I mean, I think I really like the idea of sort of when you're talking about the origin of wrestling, about that sort of Carney-esque approach to it. I think
Absolutely.
there is a sort of endearing element of that I think carries on even into modern wrestling today. I mean, again, my knowledge of modern wrestling is pretty sparse, but there is something so larger than life about it.
Yeah.
And it is just this insane mixture of hyper real characterization, and physicality. I just find it so strange that those things are sort of have become so popular on the basis that, again, as someone that was a huge fan and holds quite a lot of reverence for it, it's particularly in the era now where we've seen the rise of mixed martial arts become a real sort of prominent sort of sport.
Yeah.
That wrestling can still sort of coexist alongside that. And it's not, obviously the physicality plays a part, and there is a technical ability that is very much praised and treasured and cherished. But I think you're right in suggesting that a significant portion of it is about that sort of like playing these sort of certain character archetypes, which have always been, they're almost sort of hardwired into our sort of, I guess, wider way in which we perceive good and evil.
Yeah.
National pride or regional pride,
Yeah. And I think, like, if we are to look at the film we watched for this episode, The Iron Claw, the kind of carny, I think nowadays it is a lot more corporate and a lot more, like, you still have an independent scene. So, like, even in Bristol, like, you can go and watch a wrestling show in a bar. Like, I think they're showing it at the Trinity Centre in the next month or so.
I'm keen to go to that, I'd love to go watch, like, a local wrestling show.
Yeah. Maybe we could wrestle boys to wrestle men. Could make it debut.
The option I've always wanted.
There we go.
Yeah. This whole podcast is about that.
This is all about getting this set up.
Yeah. It's just been one long 45 episode setup for our true passion. Wrestling boys to wrestling men.
But like, so you always have like, it's like any art form or any kind of entertainment or sports, you're always going to have like your smaller or your independents, whether that's a football team in non-league, whether that's an independent film, but then you're also going to have your studio projects in film, or you're going to have your Premier Leagues and your Champions Leagues in football, or you're going to have like your like Disney's and like Paramounts and Warner Brothers, like like there's a room for all of it. But obviously nowadays wrestling's mainly known as like the WWE and maybe AEW a little bit, but mainly WWE for the like a mainstream audience in terms of wrestling. But like, especially like, in the period in Iron Claw, it was mainly, like I said, the small independent shows. Like you had, there's a lot of territories. So you'd have, like at the time, the WWE, what we would have known in the 90s as a WWF before the animal rights people ruined that.
What about that clear?
Exactly.
Still furious about that.
Yeah, it makes me want to suplex a polar bear. And
that's why I leave my lights on.
Yeah, exactly. Just show them.
Yeah. You're in the shower, Danny. No, but I'll leave it on.
Exactly. Entertainment. But yeah, back in the like, before basically WWE took over most of the kind of monopoly on wrestling, there was a lot of different companies in different areas. So even Britain, we had on TV, we'd have World of Sport. I don't know of it, but I know like even my gran knows about World of Sport. You had like wrestlers like Big Daddy and like people like that.
Yeah, and
like
Stax. Who was he? I remember my dad always going
Giant Haystacks.
He wasn't always going on about Giant Haystacks. He was like, my birthday going, this is all good and everything, but Giant Haystacks.
Yeah. Much better than you.
in every way. Loser. But but you're right in that sense that it was a very sort of factional thing, and I think it ties back into what we were saying almost at the very beginning of the discussion, is that regional pride is so central, and I think a lot of that comes from those early days of wrestling where it was territories, wasn't it? It was like a sort of a company within a sort of usually, I guess, sort of state lines, and they would operate their own sort of internal division with titles and all that kind of stuff.
But what's interesting on one of the things in the film as well is the title they talk about, which is the NWA, not the rap group or the Neighbourhood Watch Alliance from Hot Fuzz.
Or the Animal Rights Group.
A very rogue group.
Very small.
Militant.
Early days for them.
But the National Wrestling Alliance, it was the NWA's World's Heavyweight Championship, and that was, at the time, the biggest championship in wrestling. And it wasn't just one program. It wasn't like the different territories would occasionally get the NWA's World's Heavyweight Championship in their state or their city. And when they were in town, that was a big deal. I think just to add that context, it was all kind of like, it was town to town. It was very kind of like living out your car, living out your suitcase. Trying to get as much money out of a town as possible and moving on to the next one. So, you don't stay in a place for too long. So, they get a bit of kind of stardust, and then they're excited to see it again. It wasn't overly saturated, and television wasn't. Obviously, television was a big deal, but it wasn't like nowadays where you can watch so much. You can watch whatever you want.
Yeah.
And it's a thing as well, like you bring up like your UFCs and stuff like that. What I think there's wrestling then as well is that the type of wrestlers as well, like they were muscular and stuff like, and you had a few of them that would be seen as handsome or heartthrobs and stuff. But you also had just a lot of guys who just looked like brawlers.
Yeah.
And they were, they're doing a predetermined fight, but they were tough. And people still get hurt, people still get injured, people have been killed in the ring, it's still tough, but there is that sense of you could take your kid to see it, you could take your children, you take your family, you could take your nan, I hear...
Congratulations, you've just spoiled my idea for my nan's birthday.
We're going to take her to the Trinity Centre to see giant haystacks.
Yes, I am, yeah. Wrestling with a Zimmer frame.
Yeah.
Haystacks. Not my nan.
Yeah.
I think there's something in that, what you were saying about the universal nature of it and the universal appeal. And that's something I want to try and sort of pose to you guys as to what you think it is. Because, as we've said, it is very predetermined. I mean, and also, if you look at certainly the audiences that tend to populate wrestling shows, it's a very easily stereotyped crowd.
Yes.
And often a lot of men, it's sort of our age onwards, really. Like, it's not, obviously there's been a huge push to make it as family friendly as possible, but even now it does still seem to be in the sort of domain of a very set demographic. And I just wonder why you think that is, given that, yes, it is predetermined. I mean, we've sort of outlined there is still a tremendous amount of athleticism and physicality required, and there's also a sense of showmanship that's also really important. And I think it's the culmination of those elements that makes wrestling such an appealing phenomena for so many people. But, knowing that it's predetermined and all that, I don't know, it removes a sense of jeopardy that they have to construct themselves through that sort of larger-than-life nature that is inherent in wrestling, I think, and seems to attract larger-than-life individuals.
Yeah. Well, I think, like we said, it kind of come from, the kind of circus and things like that, and it developed over the years, kind of, and it's one of these forms whether you call it an art form, whether you call it a sport, I'd say it's like a kind of intriguing kind of hybrids of the two. And, you know, I know there'll be people out there who are a bit dismissive about, you know, whether it's a sport or not, but, you know, if you're constantly putting your body at risk of like breaking your neck, breaking your leg, breaking every bone in your body to pretend to fight, there's still something sporting about that. Whether you enjoy it or not.
Yeah, is there still a kind of uncertainty about how things are going to play out? Like
100%. Yeah.
So obviously you as an audience member wouldn't know the outcome anyway. But then would you also perhaps go there in that kind of almost the same way ice hockey fans go to ice hockey matches to see fights, as opposed to see the actual sport? Like, is there a kind of element of I don't actually know what's going to happen here? Something could go wrong, and I weirdly want to be here for that. I don't know.
Yeah, there's a sense of jeopardy there, isn't there? In that, I think,
without a doubt, yeah. And I think it's something that developed over the years, especially like. It was always at first like big as a live entertainment. Like, that's where it became massive.
Yeah.
That's when it was at its probably biggest, when it would have been like your kind of 50s, 60s, 70s, 80s. And this was obviously before, like, you obviously had TV since the 50s, but, you know, you didn't have the kind of myriad of options you have now. Yeah. Whether that's entertainment, whether that's sport, like you could put whatever sport you want to watch, whatever film you want to watch, whatever TV show, soap opera, like you could watch whatever now. But then, like, this was like the kind of almost amazing hybrid of all of them. And you'd have a mixture of peculiar, over the top characters in there, and I think because it's been passed on from generation, because you can't, like, I've heard stories about, like, you know, people's nans, like, being so upset at the bad guy that they're hitting them with their handbags and stuff like that. So, like, you can get people from, like, grandmothers to, like, grown, like, you know, adults, like, you know, middle-aged people to children, that, you know, you pass on this entertainment that can kind of bond people. Or like, yeah, they pass it on. It's like, oh, you know, you'll like this. It's fun, it's silly, it's actiony, but it's not like, you know, UFC. Like, you know, you can't let a 8-year-old see someone's like face get caved in or their leg actually breaking.
Yeah.
Or like, you know, like you can't like. I mean, you can, but probably not the best. You know, like this. You know, this is kind of like. It was, in a way, it's like a universal entertainment for a lot of people, like, to have, and it's had kind of ups and downs in popularity and in mainstream culture, but like, I think that's why it's stuck around, even if it is such a, especially on paper, it's such a bizarre thing when you think about it. It's like muscly men or women pretending to fight each other, and you, like, you know, they know real, you know, deep down who's going to win. On paper, it sounds ridiculous, but when you add all those contexts, that's why I think it's always had its, like, that's why it's lasted so long.
Yeah, I agree.
Whilst dipping in popularity because of other things.
There's a willing suspension of disbelief that I think is integral to its enjoyment. And I think it's easier, obviously, to do that when you're a child. But as you get older, I think, you know, I guess, I mean, I can't speak for the sort of millions of people my age that love it passionately, but I feel like that willing suspension of disbelief is so central to its enjoyment. You know, like, the larger-than-life nature of it complements that, you know. And I think, yes, there is artistry and there is absolutely technique. Like, you know, you can't not be bowled over by the sort of technical athleticism of what they're doing, because there's a sort of duality to it in the sense that you want to make people think that you've really hurt someone, but do it in a way that minimises as much sort of damage as possible to the person. And I think that there's an art form to that. I mean, I'm still convinced of that even at the age of 33, and as someone that just holds on to, like, old school wrestling as, you know, as like a formative sort of childhood experience. But I do think that willing suspension of disbelief is so important to it, and there isn't many things that do that like wrestling. I don't think.
I do think there's a kind of, you know, there's definitely a reason why Aronofsky made the companion film to The Wrestler about ballet. Like it's the same, that is a companion piece to the wrestler, definitely.
Without
the themes are the
doubt,
same.
yeah.
The ending is pretty much the same. The character journey is exactly the same. I prefer Black Swan personally, but there isn't. There's obviously ballet is an art form,
Of course.
and it's predetermined, and it's a lot favoured live as well. There's a definite sort of there's some crossover there.
Yeah, I agree.
Without a doubt, it's two performative arts, which in doing it in such a repetitive and micromanaged and trained basis, you put so much trauma on your body and on, if you're not looking after yourself properly, on your mind as well. Obviously Black Swans, I think, kind of deals with, I mean, I guess visually anyway, and kind of narratively, the kind of more psychological side of it.
Yeah.
Whereas obviously the wrestler's a bit more naturalistic, and it's just telling this kind of more straightforward narrative of it.
Yeah, I'd agree with that.
Like,
I'd agree with that.
It's definitely a companion, and they are. I mean, they're very, very comparable in a way, because it's literally the same thing. But,
the ending, the fact that, I mean, there's a sort of role reversal in that the wrestler is about a father, whereas Black Swan is very much about a daughter. And you can definitely compare them in that respect as well.
And I think it's definitely, like, obviously, like ballet would be obviously seen as a more highbrow or like more upper class.
Yeah, easy.
Like, yeah. Whereas, like, obviously, like, especially like wrestling would have been like a kind of more kind of gritty, kind of more working class sort of entertainment for people, especially in kind of like working class areas of your Texases, your Carolinas, your like wherever it is, they're very similar in terms of probably how people in those industries get treated and how they treat themselves.
Agreed. Yeah. There's a sort of physical and mental turmoil to dedicating oneself to anything, and I think both those films work as a companion piece because it is essentially about that. The loss of one's sanity in the case of Black Swan, or the loss of being able to make or resurrect sort of genuine connections with friends, family, romantic interests in the wrestler. And I think that's a really sort of key theme that we should sort of, I guess, talk about a little bit more, because it's definitely explored in Iron Claw. I think that's the sort of the central arc, I think, of the film, aside from all of the wrestling itself. And I think it's something that is explored a lot more now retrospectively with wrestling. I think we were sort of talking about it before the episode, but I think it was on Channel 4, but I don't know if it was sort of co-produced by them, but The Dark Side of the Ring.
Oh, right.
Documentary series about,
it's a very good series.
Brilliant stuff. I mean, it's just great documentary stuff, even for people that are into wrestling. I would say, well, I may be biased, but I just think immense physical and mental pressure that comes with this profession, as you say, going on the road, playing this character, this larger than life existence, and the sort of the pressure to continue to play that larger than life character. I think there's some kind of in the sort of more ugly cases or the sort of casualties within the industry, that seems to be one of the most difficult things for people to sustain and hold on to. And
absolutely.
The way in which people sort of free fall into, addiction, and the way in which it sort of like destroys the way that they can have relationships with like family. I mean, I remember one particular episode of it wasn't Dark Side of the Ring. What's the wrestling film I'm thinking of? The wrestling documentary, Beyond the Mat. Yes. There's that bit with Jake the Snake Roberts.
Yes.
He's obviously a very famous wrestler, but he is someone that has been very open about his struggles with addiction and the impact that's had on him personally and the relationships he's had subsequently with his family as a result of being a wrestler. And there's a bit in the documentary where he's trying to reconnect with his estranged daughter, which is parallels to the wrestler, right?
Yeah, oh god, yeah.
And
does he go mental in a supermarket as well?
Not as far as I'm aware.
Oh, okay. So that's exclusive to Aronofsky's. The rest.
Yes, it is.
I
Yeah,
think so.
Goes to the deli
jabbing his
counter.
hand in a deli ham slicer. That's
it,
horrible.
yeah. So great.
But you know, like it really sort of laid bare for me that the sort of the psychological and physical torment of something that is so fantastical, and you know, and I don't mean this in a negative way, quite silly.
Yeah.
And as a child, you're enraptured by that, and as an adult, looking back retrospectively to that, I'm sort of warmed by that. This sort of silliness, the larger than life nature of it, and the sort of bizarre nature of the industry in general. But I think that's something that's really worth looking into.
Well, I think it was. I mean, like any of those sort of kind of formal, like kind of carny industries or carny kind of. It was always a place for people with demons or with troubled backgrounds. It was always somewhere that these sort of people could escape. And it's interesting because, like, you know, I think that's a lot of what wrestling can be. Actually, I think for kind of adults who are still into it, I know I've had an on and off relationship with enjoying wrestling. I think a lot. You have a lot of nostalgia for like the 90s and that wrestling, and you've probably watched little bits, but like I've gone in and out of being kind of really into watching a lot of it and then like kind of being out of it. But like it was always a kind of escapism. Like if you're like, especially at the times when I was very single, it was very
not mutually exclusive to wrestling.
It was a very like you know, it was an escapism. It's a kind of like, you know, it's what this silly nonsense that like you're watching, and I think that's like it was always, I guess back in the day anyway, it was for people like, you know, who
it was like a haven for people that were sort of
a bit different or a bit like, you know, you're like in trouble or like, you know, just didn't fit in with like kind of normal society. It was a good, you know, it was a line of work for them, and then like, you know, it's developed into kind of a certain, especially like Iron Claw, like literally generations of wrestlers, like wrestling dynasties. So you got the Von Erichs from Iron Claw. You've got the Hart family, which is another wrestling dynasty of you know, wrestling promoter and his like kind of offspring becoming like kind of arguably like the best wrestlers of their generations. You've got so many, like even the Rock. He's from like I think 3 or 4 generations of wrestlers, and most of his cousins are wrestlers, and so it developed from that into like kind of many dynasties, and all sorts of characters, and some well adjusted, some not so much. But it's hard to say. It's such a strange mixture of kind of entertainment, art, sport, and it's although it's all over the world now, but it's such a also it feels so quintessentially American.
Yeah, I completely agree.
But yeah,
I agree. Okay. I also want to say quickly that I feel partly responsible for your return to wrestling post uni, a nostalgia fueled purchase of a wrestling game.
Yes, absolutely.
Oh, I remember. I remember this. Yeah.
Yes, by me, and then I ended up being a hardcore wrestling fan who, to this day, still goes to wrestling shows live.
I win. Well, it's about winning. I mean, I sort of joke about that, and it's sort of, and you know, you getting back into it, but it is something that, despite all of the sort of escapism and, you know, possibly being a haven for the outsiders and the athleticism, that it's not something you would say at a date that you're into wrestling, is it? By and large.
No, it's certainly not the icebreaker.
No. If you want it to go anywhere, you probably keep that in your back pocket for a bit.
No. You kind of test the waters first.
Yeah, all the Volleyball tonight. Nice.
Yeah.
What about Triple H and Mankind?
Yeah.
When he got pedigreed into the drawing pins.
Yeah, what is it you do for work? Oh, you're in accounting, and what did you think of Bret Hart versus a British Bulldog at SummerSlam '92?
I mean, I'd be all in if that was if we were on a date. I'd be thinking brilliant.
Shall we go on a date and talk about British Bulldog and Bret Hart?
Sack off the Volleyball, straight in that fucking Ford Fiesta. Focus, whatever car it was. I don't know.
Escort.
Escort. Fucking hell, got it wrong.
Either way,
in the Escort, actually. Yeah. Sorry,
either way, I'll grab the oil.
Good. I'm glad.
Johnson's holiday.
I spent all the money on the date that we're not even going to fucking enjoy. But no, I do think there is something. There is something about it that I think culturally is viewed as very low art or low entertainment.
Yeah, on the fringes. Yeah, I'd say. I mean,
despite its ubiquity.
Yeah,
I think there is,
there's
it's
a
not
sneeriness that you can sneer at it. Yeah,
and I can sort of understand it. Like I can sort of understand that for sure. And again, I would definitely not. In a sort of house party, would not get invited to many house parties anymore at 33. Barely did it as a teenager in the 20s. It's not an icebreaker. It's not something you would open with. But even so, it's sort of almost like, and I'm not sort of saying that wrestling is directly comparable to this, but it's like U2. No one knows a U2 fan, yet they're so big. No one really knows that many people that are that into wrestling, but it's fucking massive.
Well, I think
I definitely prefer wrestling to U2.
Yeah, that goes without saying. But I think it's one of those, like, as and I'm gonna be that U2 fan here. Not U2, but I'm gonna be. I am a wrestling fan. I don't watch it as much now, but like I said, I've been on and off with it, and but in fact I did go to Wembley last year with 80,000 other kind of wrestling fans to watch a live show, but I will say I do understand why people can't get on with it, because again, it's I think if you didn't necessarily grow up with it and you just kind of put it on paper, and if you just see it on TV, it's just like, I think it's hard to kind of understand its kind of unique selling point.
I agree. Yeah.
But if you, like I say, if you've grew up with it, if you've looked at, like, if you, like, for example, like, you watch films like The Iron Claw, or you watch stuff like Dark Side of the Ring or Beyond the Mat, like, I guess you see, like, you've become in some ways like less interested in the actual story going on in the ring or like on television or whatever it is, but like kind of what's going on behind it. You're like, who are these people? Yeah. Why are they doing this?
Yeah.
Why are they seen as good? Why, why do they do what they do? But at the same time, like, I do understand why it's, seen as kind of like, like a bit lowbrow, or a bit like, oh, why do you like that? But then I guess it's like anything, like, it's no different from like, it's
reality television.
Reality television, or you look at, it's starting to, I think, die a bit of a death, but like you look at superhero films.
Yeah. Like,
we know that it's not real. That, like,
predetermined stories,
stories,
kind of like sprawling narrative.
Yeah.
And honestly, nice comparison.
Yeah, and honestly, like, you could compare the two, you probably get better villains and more interesting, more nuanced, layered performances in like wrestling.
Give me Paul Bearer over Thanos any day.
Yeah, like, honestly, like, ultimately, if you put anything on paper, it's not going to be that impressive.
It's a reductive exercise doing that.
Yeah, because you put a film on paper. It's people filming things that aren't real, or a book. It's people writing stories about things that didn't happen and people that didn't exist. Like, you can put anything on paper and it doesn't sound as impressive, and that's the same with wrestling. But
more so, probably.
Yeah, but I also. So I guess that's more of a like, don't just dismiss it, but also I get why you don't want to watch it. So
it's funny though. Like, the three wrestling films I can think of, all three directors have approached it with a real respect. You've got Scorpion King. No, Chuck Russell's a Scorpion
He's trying.
King. Yeah. You got Fighting With My Family, which is like a pretty, a bit of a crowd pleaser.
Yeah.
But nonetheless, like, Stephen Merchant directed it, actually.
Yeah.
He does approach it with like a sort of gentle respect, and then you've got Sean Durkin and Darren Aronofsky, who have made two very films that take themselves really, really seriously. That are quite sad and quite melancholic, and very three-dimensional characters involved in it, and they're about this sport. So there must be something in that, I think.
I agree. It's and I think it is. It goes back to that sort of the appeal of things like Dark Side of the Ring. It is the appeal of what kind of people are drawn to this lifestyle. And and what costs for some people that lifestyle has on them, and again their sort of relationships with others. I think that is a central theme of those films. I think it's a central theme of the sort of more, I guess, like the sort of more highbrow approach to wrestling. It's like, it's funny. I was talking with a friend the other day about NFL. He was saying, well, I'm not really into NFL, but I love all the NFL documentaries.
Oh, right,
and I feel like documentaries are like a really good way for people to get like a sort of deeper appreciation for the sort of intricacies of a sport or something that is previously inaccessible.
Yeah, I mean, I love mountaineering because of the documentaries.
Yeah,
I can't climb a mountain, but like I love the.
I
just love the subject matter now because of what the documentaries I've seen. So similar, maybe.
No, I think it's like anything. Like you look at it from the outside, or you look at it in its simplicity. And I guess it doesn't seem that impressive or that, like, it seems like a bit of a kind of waste of time, if you will. But then, like, the more you look into it and the more you see what goes on to make it, or, how to, the people who do make it, I think you see these people who, like, you couldn't imagine seeing Darren Aronofsky at a wrestling show.
No.
Wonder if he went to any.
I think he must have done. Yeah.
For him to agree to that project, he must have at least a low key appreciation for it.
Well, Stephen Merchant went to a few, because I remember on his Instagram he went to see wrestling beforehand, and he was very sort of open about the initial sort of, I guess, genesis of the film was because it was The Rock, wasn't it, who saw the documentary about Paige, the wrestler. Gave it to Steve, said to Steve Merchant, "You should make this," which I think was pretty good fucking foresight from him, really. Because I think Stephen Merchant's sort of stylings, arguably not as acerbic as they are in The Office, but they would work for that kind of movie, and as a sort of sports movie. It works
perfectly.
It's a quite enjoyable movie, and
I think the more you kind of understand it, I guess, and the more you kind of look deeper into it, I think the more impressed, or at least how much of a respect you tend to get for it. Whether you still like it or it appeals to you or not, I think you're like, fair play, and I think Fight for My Family is really good for that. It's like good balance between telling this story of like a family who are just like, they're larger than life for a bit, they're quite eccentric, like it's funny, and there'll be certain moments which are funny because they're so eccentric, but then it's quite heartfelt because you see the love and affection they have, how hard they work, how how much they kind of care about this business that they're in.
I think there's something there as well about humanising those individuals, because the fact that they're so written off, more broadly speaking, by the nature of the industry they've chosen to work in, and the sort of requirements on them as people to be these larger than life characters, I think there's something more compelling about that, about breaking. It's like almost harder to break into that world, but once you do, as a result of those films or the documentaries, and you start to see how reality and the wackiness of wrestling intersect, because reality, as silly as it sounds, plays quite a significant role in the way the story writers in wrestling write the stories. I mean, this is going to get quite nerdy now, but I remember as a kid, one of my favourite wrestlers was Jeff Hardy, and I fucking loved the Hardy Boys. Like, I was obsessed with them. And Matt Hardy at the time was in a relationship with Lita, who was a female wrestler, famous for the thong that would come ridiculously high above the trousers. I mean, the overt sexualisation of women in wrestling is definitely problematic in the modern lens, and it's something they've actually, I think, mostly got rid of in modern wrestling. I think.
Oh, really?
Not always brilliant. Not hugely, but I think. The athleticism is definitely more appreciated.
I think it's a lot more focused now on the athleticism, and then there's always going to be, I think, inherently a kind of.
As long as Vince McMahon's in charge, there's always going to be some overt sexualisation.
Well, he's gone gone now.
That's true. Yes, of course.
Yeah,
How could I forget?
He's gonzo for the moment. He seems to always get away with. Like, he always gets himself out of bloody allegations and stuff. But
these seem to be sticking a lot more than the past.
Yeah. So I think
fucking fair play if they end up being true, which I'm.
Good riddance to shit.
Yeah, exactly. Totally.
But like, it's always going to be slightly set. I mean, because ultimately, like, it is people who are kind of like muscular. They're not wearing many clothes, and that's the males and the females. It's quite a kind of like it's always going to be slightly sexualized, and like because it's seeing people at their kind of like. At the physical peak of humanity. Interestingly, Werner Herzog has talked about this a few times as well, because he's quite fascinated with WrestleMania.
Yeah.
And because he kind of compares it to kind of like gladiators, like ancient gladiators, and that sort of thing, where it's these kind of like like the kind of what they see as like the ultimate in kind of physical appearance. So there's always going to be an inherent kind of sexuality in that. But definitely like back in the kind of day, like women were a lot more sexualized than the men. Like it was, especially in the 90s, and the crudeness of 90s and television and stuff like that as well. And such a kind of like that
bizarre approach to storytelling,
testosterone based, and it's a time of kind of like Beavis and Butthead, American Pie, like sex and horniness like that. There was a lot of women on TV that even if they had what they wanted was did she have a nice backside, or but Lita was also a talented,
fantastic wrestler.
Yes, but sorry, I was
no, it's a worthy segue. But I mean, basically, I guess it's more for you, Ben. Really,
I'm quite interested.
But so Lita was in a relationship with Matt Hardy at the time,
right? Okay,
and then Lita had a real life affair with another wrestler called Edge.
Oh, okay.
Not the guitarist from U2.
Oh, okay.
I'd love to see him fight Edge in a wrestling match. Maybe that's an idea for a storyline.
The Edge is fine. Yeah.
Edge versus Edge, the ultimate battle, the edging, the edge off.
Yeah. Loser changes his name.
That's a great idea.
The side.
There it is.
The side.
The rim.
The rim. Yeah.
And so she had a very publicly known affair.
Okay.
With Edge. And obviously that caused quite a lot of discontent in the locker room because obviously she's whatever, all that sort of stuff, and that all kind of unfurls. And the writers then decide to write that into a storyline.
Oh, okay, yeah. So there's a blurring.
Yeah, so that again, like it's sort of through the lens of this sort of again hyper sort of like performative, over the top. Dramedy, I guess, in many ways.
Yeah, okay.
And then Matt Hardy and Edge end up having a match.
Right, okay, yeah.
As a result of this, and it becomes like a feud, and there's like a feud's, again, wrestling terminology, but like, a feud is something that builds the sort of suspense to like a main event, usually.
Right, okay, yeah.
Titles or whatever. And that was real, there was real animosity, real hatred, and, I mean, the way, I remember there was a bit where, Edge and Lita pretended to have sex in a bed in a wrestling ring.
Okay, yeah.
And it was pretty risque.
Right, yeah.
And mental stuff,
Yeah.
That's not the thing you'd show to people to try and win them over with wrestling.
Okay, yeah.
But like, it's through that prism. That's what I find so sort of fascinating about it. I'm not sort of trying to sound like I'm over intellectualizing it, but like the idea that something very real has happened, and there are very real emotions.
Okay.
That are, bubbling.
Yeah.
And the writer's like, nah, we're going to write this in, and then it gets siphoned through this sort of fucking wrestling filter, which has to amp everything up to 11.
Wow, yeah. Okay.
And that happened a lot.
Yeah. But that's what that's a kind of similar, like, because you hear stories about kind of films being made or plays being made where like the kind of actors have had kind of drama backstage, or like they've either fallen out or they've had affairs. Like God, like like
classic Hollywood's full of it.
Burton Taylor, like
Dietrich,
David
Lynch and Rossellini.
Right,
Like it's similar, but obviously again it's on paper or in comparison, I guess it's seen as a bit like, but it's in that way like very very similar, like and that shows like the kind of creative nature of it as well, and how like it's constantly it's such a unique kind of art form. Like you can have that, like you can have like the two wrestlers pretending to have sex in the middle of the ring, or if you were to watch in Japan, you've got New Japan Pro Wrestling, which I've occasionally watched, and they treat it literally like a sport. You watch the matches and the slaps, the punches, the kicks, they're still like, it's still predetermined, and they are like, still in comparison to an actual fight, taking it easy. But it looks like they're genuinely kicking two bows out of each other. And the crowd in Japan as well, they're not as like kind of excitable as like the kind of more Western crowd. It's a lot of applauses.
It's more about technical ability.
Yeah, it's about technical ability, and it's about like, and they'll have like literally like tournaments, like a round robin, like you'll have like two groups of like people, and the best two go into like the semis and like the finals, and it's just treated like a sport. And that's why it's so comparable to film and kind of like novels, really, for me, because you can portray it in so many different ways. You can have so many absurd contrasts, but you can literally portray it in any way you want to, and if it's done well, the audience will buy it.
All right, then. So I guess we've already sort of alluded to the other films in question, but I guess as it's a film podcast, we should probably address them a little bit more. The Wrestler, for me, I think, is arguably still the best wrestling film.
Yeah, okay.
I think.
Yeah.
I think because it does such a good job of humanising that element we've sort of previously discussed, the sort of the darker side of something that's so fantastical and athletic and sometimes really quite silly. And I also like that it wrestles with a very sort of tried and tested sort of character or characterization, which is the sort of a fallen giant in a sense, someone that in a period of history was the guy, in not only in his industry, but he was almost like The Rock is, someone that is so big, so charismatic that they transcend the industry that they're a part of, and they become this sort of cultural phenomena. And I think that's one of the more sort of compelling elements of The Wrestler, is him dealing with that, because again, we talk about this idea of these larger than life characters. So many of those characters of their era either sink or swim after a certain point, and then they're sort of relegated, spending their life, waiting for like callbacks to come back for a blast of nostalgia, or they just do the independent circuits and they have to sort of like do things that are far more dangerous as a result. And I just think that The Wrestler does that really well.
Absolutely. I think obviously like it was nice in a way, even though he's I don't know what he does now. I think he's just had more surgery and talks about Putin, I think. But it was nice that Mickey Rourke had a comeback for a little while. Because he was
a time when it was like, good on you, Mickey.
Yeah.
Now it's like, oh.
Yeah.
But then it was like, yeah.
Yeah, because obviously he's such a talented actor, and he was such a unique screen presence. This like. Because initially it was supposed to be Nicolas Cage in The Wrestler.
Oh wow!
It was, wasn't it?
But then, Nicolas Cage was doing like the preparation for it and stuff like that. But then I think Mickey Rourke became available or something like that, and like Darren Aronofsky kind of in retrospect as well, rightly so, like sort of that this is...
There's a meta-narrative there, isn't there?
There's a meta-narrative, and like it mirrored a lot of Mickey Rourke's career, and like he looked the part, like it couldn't have been more perfect for him. So like, And Nicolas Cage, I think, has even said as well, like he graciously stepped aside. It was no like, he was like absolutely
he was like, I've just been lifting weights for 3 months.
Yeah.
Fuck's sake.
Yeah.
I mean,
pay for this castle in fucking northern Germany.
Yeah.
And the dinosaur eggs that I own. Cheers, Mickey.
Yeah. Although I absolutely would have loved to see Nicolas Cage's take on it, but.
Yeah, I mean, it would definitely, But
very
I'm glad
different
that
film,
he graciously stepped aside all the same.
Absolutely, like so, Mickey Rourke was perfect for it. He looked the part, and even it's the opening scene, it's like one of the opening scenes as well. It's when it's just him like picking out like thumbtacks and staples out of his back, and it just shows, and that's like and like we were talking about earlier on in the episode, like that was not like a big show. That was like in front of a couple of hundred people for like a little bit of change. Like and that's it does encapsulate a little bit of that life, especially like when you're for lack of better word and lack of nuance, like you're a bit of we're seen as a has-been.
Yeah, he definitely is, isn't he? Film. Yeah.
And like it's like really tragic, and like the way he's just trying to rebuild his kind of relationship with those he's kind of abandoned in the pursuit of either personal glory or just personal enjoyment, because obviously a lot of that life is like being on the road with the boys, getting the beers in, and just like the family and kind of like and it shows somebody kind of realizing it's even battling with it, because it's not just like I regret it, like he also misses it. He misses the life.
Yeah.
But he also there's a remorseness, there's a sadness, and I think the film perfectly encapsulates all of that.
It's only in the decline of his career that he sees the merit in family and relationships. And as the film progresses and there's the sniff of opportunity that he can return to former glory, the battle comes back, that sort of internal battle between chasing that high and or the maintenance of the relationships that he's slowly rebuilding.
Aronofsky's very good at there's a shot that he does, he repeats this time and time again throughout his films. It's very simple, just a mid shot following someone around, basically. So you see the back. And there's a lot of that in The Wrestler. Alluding to what you said before, Lee, about the staples, him picking the staples out of his back. But I do remember thinking at the time, like, it's like, that camera angle you get pre-wrestling match when they're, and unboxing as well, like, it's the silhouette, right, of the person coming into the ring, and all the lights are in front of them, and you see you see their face, you just see their name, and it's almost like Aronofsky's like, right, I'm just going to carry on with that throughout the whole film, and so what happens afterwards, and getting a glimpse into this guy's life. I just thought
that's
just
great.
Kind of popped into my head now. What a kind of way to use that sort of the act of the camera following someone.
It's almost demystifying it, isn't it? It's like. It's usually seen in that kind of way. It's like, they go to the ring or like, whatever. It's in such a kind of like, it's making them look like a big deal.
Yes.
But then it's used in other ways where it's like, well, actually, this person isn't a big deal now.
Alienates them and isolates them. Doesn't
it? No, I like The Wrestler a lot. I do need to sort of revisit it, but I remember it being one of his most matter-of-fact films, because he's quite into his sort of spiritual
highfalutin sort of.
I think that was one of those where he knew he just needed to tell the story. Because sometimes the story speaks for itself, I think he was smart enough there to know that he didn't need to bring Jesus into it.
I was waiting for a sort of like ladder
cameo
match. Mickey Rourke versus Jesus. The film also taps into something I wanted to sort of discuss a little bit, particularly with my knowledge of this sort of area of wrestling isn't that great, but like backyard wrestling.
Yes.
The sort of like perverse sort of masochism of it. Like, it is fucking horrible. Like, my Instagram That's the only thing I can just get on my Instagram now. I mean, it's better than Jordan Peterson videos, but which are everywhere always. Yeah. You know, like backyard wrestling videos of like people being smashed through glass and thrown through stuff. And
is it that guy? I think his name's he calls it Superhuman, who he literally just like is constantly jumping on like really crazy stuff where it's either like glass or barbed wire, and he always goes, "Here's to my juggalos and juggalites," and then he like just always.
It's not
jumps.
that guy. I know who you mean. Yeah, I know who you mean. I think he's definitely sort of riding on the back of that. But like, it's weird you mentioned him. Actually, he came on my feed today. Funnily enough, you really can make money doing anything, can't you?
Yeah.
So tune in to the next episode of Cineboys to Cinemen, where as a trio, we will be jumping on a microwave covered in barbed wire and Lego
and fox piss.
Yeah. That's just for the enjoyment.
Yeah, I've got it all prepared.
Yeah. I wonder what those foxes were doing in that cage.
Yeah, I've been knackered. I've been running around Easton in Bristol just catching foxes. It's taken me ages. And then filling them full of Evian. So they piss in jugs so I can, like, use it. Honestly, if you guys don't appreciate it, I'll be furious. I've been bitten. I don't want rabies.
Yeah. Quite expensive that you've gone for specifically just Evian as well.
Yeah. Well, you know, I've got to treat the foxes right. WWF after all.
Yeah, not that horrible.
The looming shadow.
Not that horrible Bristol Council water.
Oh God, no. Yeah,
I want to kill them.
No, exactly. No. I do have the fox's best interests at heart.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
But I do think
take that, Bristol City Council.
Yeah. We're ragging on you now. Yeah. Cineboys are onto you now. We know your game.
Yeah.
I challenge you, Marvin Rees, at WrestleMania.
Get in my Ford Escort.
I challenge you at WrestleMania, Cabot Circus.
Dizzy Rascal was there yesterday.
There we go, triple threat.
It writes itself.
Book it, baby. Yeah.
One half of the MIDI boys.
I'm going to Pure Gym later to bulk up to take them both on.
That is a match.
Hey, you know, someone wants to make it. I heard Wayne Rooney might be getting into boxing. Get him involved. Like Fatal 4-Way.
It's eerily reminiscent of when Booker T got attacked by Stone Cold at the supermarket.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
You should do like fighting Claire's accessories.
Yeah.
Piercing each other's backs.
Oh, excellent. Yeah, I'll throw a like chicken tender at him and Slim Chickens.
Yeah. Some bang average chips from Frankie at Benny's. And Benny's, not that bad, aren't they?
Frankie in Benny.
Is that what it's called?
No.
No, all right.
Don't worry.
Frankie versus Benny will be on the undercard.
Yeah. But there is something about that element of it which I think is it sort of aids the more troubling aspects of the film in terms of the destruction of the body.
Yeah,
the pursuit of, you know, satisfying like 100 men in a fucking town hall somewhere, you know.
Yeah.
The film captures that really well, and we always talk about, you know, classic wrestling is more famously known for being that more brutal.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah.
In a way that modern wrestling isn't, and I just wonder about that in terms of like that is the sort of darker element of it, isn't it?
Yeah.
The idea of being like, oh no, I want to see someone you get thrown into like, yeah, obviously, yeah, you know, it's still going to be as safe as it can be, but then I think maybe in backyard wrestling, maybe it isn't always as well, you know.
Well, is that like? I mean, what is good about the wrestler as well? It shows as well. It's like there is only so much. Again, for lack of a better word, there's only so much you can fake it.
Yeah.
There's also a good documentary. I can't remember if it was on HBO or ESPN, and it was about Ric Flair, and he shows on camera how to blade, which is when you see a wrestler bleeding.
I think I've seen,
and
I've seen that.
Like, they get like a little razor blade, and they do like a little slice in like your forehead or just wherever it is, And then, like, obviously, when your opponent then kind of hits you or does whatever, like the wound's already been slightly open, so they don't need to do much. But then, like, when their arm comes away, they're pouring with blood, and it kind of gives it that authenticity. And I think the wrestler's good in that way as well, and it shows it with the staples and with like kind of like your hardcore matches. It shows the visceralness, and it shows it's like like, you know, like they've planned this out and they've discussed it, and like there's certain things like, but they're still in pain, they're still hurting, and they're still like doing all this to entertain a crowd of 100 people, 100 like drunk people, just like kind of like, you know, like desperate
sort
for
of
blood.
Thirsty, I was just say thirsty.
And that's, it goes back to Herzog, doesn't it? The gladiatorial element.
You must
Yeah.
not avert your eyes. That thing.
Exactly, and it shows that, and it's like, again, it's not looking down at it or anything like. It's just again, it's showing its respect. It's showing the kind of like the artistry of it, but it's also showing, especially in his Mickey Rourke's character, the tragicness of
it accentuates that, doesn't it?
Because it's like he's doing all this, and like he's not getting much in return anymore. Like he's done all that, and he might have been big in the 80s or whatever, but like, you know, he's like now like a butcher in a supermarket, and his daughter's kind of only just like, you know, barely talking to him,
tentatively entertaining the idea of rekindling the relationship.
So I think it's a really good and like very accurate kind of portrayal of that, like that industry, you know, and that life, and you know, a certain, I don't think it's particularly based on one person, but I think there's probably a few kind of wrestlers that you could probably point at and go like, there's bits of him in there, like, you know, and especially for someone like like we said, like you can't imagine kind of Darren Aronofsky being the most hardcore wrestling fan, but he's really kind of, you know, he really captured it so kind of perfectly.
He really did. Yeah. I agree. As an aside, I only recently found out that Mickey Rourke actually worked at a deli counter for a bit.
Oh, really?
For the film,
Oh, man.
Really?
Served Gouda by Mickey Rourke.
Get 6 olives. 6?
Mickey, come on.
Come on, mate.
Yeah.
Do research for a film.
I
still do want exactly 100 grams.
Yeah. How about researching by doing your job properly?
Yeah. Think of that. Oh.
And getting battered by him.
Yeah, he'd just come find me, wouldn't he? Just
with the olives.
He'd drown me in them.
Yeah.
In the oil.
You'll be picking the olives out your back.
Yeah.
Drowning in olive oil. That'd be a terrible way to go.
Oh, I mean, unique, you know.
Yeah.
There'd be an article written about you, but it wouldn't necessarily portray you in the most positive light. Yeah.
It'd be a weird funeral.
Yeah. Don't mention
quite expensive as well, considering how much oil you would need to drown in as well.
Vegetable oil.
Shot of the day, like the other day, today. That's starting to sound like a fucking, you know.
What's the deal with olive oil?
What's the deal with olive oil? Yeah, I fucking love it.
Third pressing.
But like, it is expensive.
Yeah. It's like fucking £3.50.
I mean, and Mickey Rourke at that stage in his career, it's like he can't afford that much olive oil to drown someone.
No.
You never know. I don't know. Did he have these sort of angel heart check squirreled away? I'm not sure. Maybe.
That's what he shouted as people were having a go at him at the deli counter. I was in Angel Heart.
Yeah.
Niro.
I was Harry Angel in Angel Heart.
Yeah. So cut me some slack. All right.
Yeah. And then I said, how about you cut me some Gouda? And then he drowned me in olive oil. Yeah.
But you survived, thankfully.
Yeah, I lived to
tell the tale.
Yeah.
Slippery though. Slippery as ever.
Yeah.
Uncomfortable.
And with high blood pressure.
Fighting with my family.
Yes.
I'm not just saying that I'm not going to detail my family issues. Of course, talking about the film, definitely lighter than The Wrestler.
Yeah, it's the kind of film that, had it been made by like sort of less experienced hands, it would have been like straight to TV sort of thing. But
Yeah.
It does have a vibe about it, doesn't it?
Yeah.
Not to its detriment necessarily.
But it's it's definitely that debut by someone who's been in the industry a long time but has never directed before. Like, the camera doesn't do anything particularly interesting. The writing's great, but it's serviceable in that respect. But like, I mean, it launched Florence Pugh's career, so you know. Yeah, I did like it, and I think it just sort of, it could have done, you know, had it got the Aronofsky treatment, it would have been a much different film, and it would have lost a lot of the humour, but the central message might have been kind of.
I think the problem it has is it's a film for, and it's such a weird. You never think these two would come together. It's a film for and WWE Studios production, and I think the problem is not necessarily film for. I think they're in the clear here. If you look at the track records of both film companies, I think the problem is obviously like it's got WWE's hands all over it in terms of like it wants to be a bit clean and a bit kind of like, you know. It didn't want to be too controversial. It didn't really want to show too much how, I guess, nasty or kind of cynical the wrestling business can be. Yeah. And it's and especially because it was made before all these Vince McMahon allegations have come out. Not that I know anything that he did to Paige or anything, but like it certainly wasn't probably showing how creepy some of those WWE executives probably were to a young woman trying to make it in the wrestling business. So it's like, it is a bit clean.
Yeah,
it's very sanitised.
It's very sanitised. It does show elements of like how hard it is to be a wrestler and like the kind of like struggles of like a wrestling family trying to just kind of make ends meet, because like you know, they are still just like a working class family in Norwich.
Yeah, I liked that part of it. Yeah, that was my favourite part.
That was the best bits. When it was them and the family in Norwich. Like it's when it went to America with the WWE. Like
you lost it, didn't it?
You lost it. I lost interest for the most part.
Yeah.
And you are right. Like in terms of like visually, it's not that kind of like impressive. But like what Stephen Merchant's very good at, and what he learnt with his years working with Ricky Gervais as well, it's that balance of like funny, taking the mick, but also like having a heart and like having a sensitive side, and like showing love between that family as well, and like, you know, how they kind of have each other's back.
It's restraint as well on his part. I think Stephen Merchant is, I've always said it, but I feel like looking back at like his career, Office, Extras, I think, and certainly seeing Ricky Gervais as he works on his own, that Stephen Merchant's talents are He's very, very central, I think, to the brilliance of their collaborative work.
Oh, yeah, completely.
Yeah.
And it does go to show, because Fighting With My Family has a real sort of that kind of warm British heart about it, which can win me over or can irritate me, and in this case, it sort of won me over. So,
but it restrained itself enough. I think it I feel like Merchant can sort of like, he won't over-egg it necessarily.
No, yeah, definitely.
Vince Vaughn's in it. Not his first time working in sort of vaguely sort of English production. Bowls. What's the bowling film called?
Not Kingpin. That's American, wasn't it?
Black Ball.
Filmed in Torquay. That.
Oh, really?
Parts of it. Yeah, Vince Vaughn in Torquay.
There you go. Everyone was asking for it.
And by God, we got it.
Turn on the Christmas lights as well. That'd be so good.
Him and Peter Andre had to have a hell of a sell.
Yeah.
A hardcore
Peter Andre lost, so he did it in Coventry with Katie Price.
I mean, you know, Torquay's loss is Coventry's gain.
Exactly.
As I'm sure you'd agree.
You know, we've never quite hit those heights again.
No. Steve Mulhern at all?
Sadly not. But I did once serve him in a McDonald's in Canterbury, and
I bet he was a twat.
Actually, a very nice guy.
Oh, whatever. Whatever.
Sorry to say it.
Whatever. You've been paid off by him. You shill.
He's actually also buying this podcast, so you guys are now magic boys to magic men.
We have to go on a panto with him, aren't we now?
Yeah, you are.
You can keep the podcast, and I won't have any editorial rights, but Jack and the Beanstalk.
Yeah. Well, I always thought like you were going to be doing Peter Pan with David Suchet as Captain Hook.
I mean, I'd quite like to meet David Suchet, so it's not all bad.
All I'm saying is, if there's some sort of David Suchet panto, I think maybe it should be reviewed this year on the podcast.
We could break into theatre, is that what you're
Yeah,
saying? Expand our cultural
exactly.
horizons.
That'll be episode 100.
Yeah.
Suchet guest.
Yeah.
I'd love to sort of like chloroform him.
Yeah.
Maybe do the podcast in some sort of like shed in the Orkney Islands. Let's go on to
Let's go on to the Iron Claw. Yeah.
We're an hour and 24 and we spoke about the fucking
We're all
film.
good.
Yeah,
We're all
sure you
good,
don't want to talk another hour 20 about the things you want to do to David Suchet or
Okay, so
Iron Claw?
Yeah, what were your initial thoughts, Danny? Because I know you said to me you kind of mainly liked it, but do you have some reservations as well?
My reservations came from the trailer in the sense that the trailer in classic
A24
style, I thought it gave far too much away.
Right, okay.
And I think obviously that's a very common criticism with a lot of trailers, but I sort of thought A24 was sort of better than that in a way. But it was very much something immediately I thought, this looks very formulaic.
Okay, yeah.
And I'm not saying that necessarily as a criticism because, as we've spoken about before, like if you adhere to formula, it can work. Like you can inject your own spin on that formula, and you can be rigid, but you can still find something worthwhile in it. Like we've spoken about that a lot, the context of action films, and you know, like you can absolutely still make a great film within the confines of a certain genre and the formula that dictates it. But I was just thinking, I don't know, maybe it was because the trailer was out, particularly in the watershed, for so long, it began to grate on me more and more, this idea that formula was, oh God. And after coming out of the film, I think my attitude towards those sort of preconceived criticisms were largely vindicated because it is very formulaic.
Yeah, oh yeah. It's the kind of thing that Walk Hard mocked, right? And they're still doing it. It's the biopic problem.
Yeah, absolutely. It's you know, I didn't go in expecting it, and I would say to anyone, you know, wanting to go and see it, like, or sort of on the fence for whatever reason, but like, you know, like, don't
on the
go
edge. Sorry,
edging.
Yeah.
Don't go in expecting anything to reinvent the wheel. However, I think whereas there is an element of that which did detract from my overall enjoyment a smidge, it didn't prevent me from not enjoying the movie.
Yeah,
I thought I actually came out and I enjoyed it. I thought it was solid.
Yeah.
Solid across the board.
Yeah, I thought the emotionally, overall, we kind of hit the emotions quite hard, especially the end, the very last scene. That won me over, and I think that might be a bit polarising.
Yeah, funny enough, we talked about this over my bubbling egg Indian curry.
Oh, okay.
Which was delicious, I must add.
Thanks.
Yeah, Danny made us a curry. It was delicious. It was really nice.
I make curries.
Unusual. Yeah.
David Suchet, if you're listening, I'm okay at curry.
Yeah. Obviously, so the Iron Claw is about like the Von Erich family, who were an art family, like a multi-generation family of wrestlers. The patriarch is Fritz Von Erich, who, according to the film, and he I think came to prominence in like the 40s and 50s. He wasn't actually called Von Erich. He changed his name. He was an American, but at the time, it's around World War II. And Von Erich was a good bad guy name because it was like it gave off very Nazi connotation. So he's going to get a lot of booing and like, you know. So he was a patriarch of a family. And then he had, I can't even remember how many children, because in the film there's five.
Including the young one that dies.
There's 5 children in the film, and there was also one that was not in the film. But 4 of them also were professional wrestlers as well in their own rights. The various successes, all obviously following their father's footsteps. and are kind of considered like kind of one of the most influential wrestling families of their time. They had a wrestling promotion, because this is back in the wrestling territory days, pre-WWE domination, where, they were one of the big hitters in the wrestling kind of industry. It follows the kind of tragic story of...
It's the curse, isn't it? It's like...
Yeah.
It's the Von Erich curse, which was kind of falsely attributed to bad luck, whereas... the kind of film examines it in a more kind of matter-of-fact way of it might actually be of sort of the way they've been brought up and the way that their kind of strengthened bond with each other is actually partially the result of kind of having to endure a forced lifestyle.
Yeah, I like it. It constantly battles with that, and like the main character, it's him fighting with it as well. It's I think many of us in life have had moments of good luck, and we've had moments of bad luck, and sometimes if you get if you get a period of like bad luck, not to the extent of this film, just to clarify, it's hard for you to sit you might think so. I must be cursed, or there's there's no. Way out of this, but
there's no way this could be circumstance.
There's
got to be something.
You attribute it to some sort of this sort of otherworldly force that is targeting you.
And
it's just a way of, it's like catharsis, isn't it?
It's a way out.
It's a way of feeling like
It's attributing a scapegoat to a higher being.
When it is just
all over you.
Rotten luck.
Yeah, exactly. And the film wrestled with that quite a bit, especially in the sort of how Zac Efron conducts himself and how he brings up his own child, and that is a really interesting sort of theme, I thought, and I handled that quite well.
Absolutely. And a lot of it's luck, a lot of it's like circumstance, and a lot of it they're adults in the film, but for lack of a better word, these they're all kind of children of the patriarch. He's a very domineering, he's a very forceful person, and they all want to do him proud. They don't want to let him down. They want to be the best they can be, and I'm sure maybe some of it's for himself, but a lot of it is for the dads. There's a lot of this. They bring up Fritz's need for somebody in the family to win the NWA's World's Heavyweight Championship, which of course, it being wrestling, it's not something you win legitimately by fighting. It's something you win by...
It's like a promotion, isn't it?
Yeah, it's a promote. It's like a cross promotion, so it will go from territory to territory, and in wrestling, obviously you don't win the championship by being the strongest fighter. You win the championship by being the most marketable, the most impressive, whether that's, like we said earlier, whether it's by being the most hated bad guy or the most heroic hero, or basically being the person who draws in the most money. And that's what it's, That's
the performance-based element of it, isn't it?
Yeah. Who's going to sell most tickets if you're the world's heavyweight champion? And that's a real bugbearer of Fritz. He wants one of his children to be that heavyweight champion because he never got it, because he feels like he was screwed out of it. I think it's very reminiscent of many stories of and this is any industry or very he's very forceful, he's very aggressive. I feel like he's probably his heart's probably in the right place, but it's inherently misguided. That's my take on it anyway. But he's very forcing them in a kind of non-emotional way to just be the best at everything and pushing them no matter what. It's a very masculine, it's a very
you put on a show the entire time, kind of thing. Even when you're at your brother's funeral, you can't cry. You have to you have to maintain composure, and you have to present yourself as a success to the world, no matter the cost. That's the kind of
the most misguided kind of toxic masculinity kind of way to look at emotion. Oh, just everything really.
Agreed. Yeah.
And in many ways, like, that does take its toll on every single one of the
family.
Family.
Yeah, completely.
It's sort of their, it's this sort of idea that obviously they aren't allowed to have struggle.
Yeah, exactly.
They're not allowed to have struggles, and they're not allowed to, express them in any way. And through being able to sort of say, I'm not doing very well, or I'm feeling that this is too much.
Yeah.
The catharsis that comes with that, none of that's allowed. And I think it is like a really sort of quite an effective comment on that front, on the idea that dealing with any sort of trouble in a way that is sort of more befitting for this sort of archetypal figure of masculinity is ultimately self-destructive.
Yeah.
And it's incredibly heartbreaking, I think. And I think you're right, Lee, in the sense that whilst the father figure, Fritz, isn't necessarily painted in a particular good light, as he shouldn't necessarily, I think there is a bit of nuance there and pathos in him. I think you can definitely tell that he obviously loves his kids and wants the best for them, but I think his own demons, the way he manages his own demons, isn't through expression and through gentleness, and it's through
grit, it's through force,
and brutish,
and
that's his version of love. And of course, as we've sort of discussed in the film, that is not something that's going to lead to a sort of creating individuals that can handle the rigours and difficulties of life in a sort of more nuanced and appropriate manner. But I do think you're right in that whilst obviously I staunchly oppose the overarching methods of parenthood that he deploys, he's not evil.
No,
he's not
nasty.
nasty.
Not presented as evil. No. I don't think. I think he's
No.
presented as, like you say, very misguided. Primarily through sort of an opening scene where he's providing for his family, right? And he's kind of built up this ethos through his own career and potentially through his own experience as a child as well, and he's just passing it on. And there's that sense also that he's kind of passed it on to David as well, and Zac Efron, and the way he's, well, not David and Zac Efron, because he started to inhabit the same mindset as well. Before ultimately rejecting it. I actually think my favourite scene in this film is, I can't remember the wrestler he fights, he basically pummels him.
Oh, Ric Flair.
Yeah, Ric Flair,
Yeah.
And then Ric Flair comes to the dressing room afterwards, after he's been disqualified, and there's a sense that you think he's going to kick off, and he just goes, "Oh, that was great, man! I can't believe you did that." Who wants to get fucked up? And this is this moment where David just realises that this guy doesn't put as nearly as much importance on the sport as he does. And he just and from that moment on in the film, his attitude just sort of changes completely, and he becomes a lot. He sort of rejects his dad's influence on him, and he starts to see his son again because he doesn't believe the curse is real, because he realizes it's all sort of a facade. At least that's what I got from it anyway.
Yeah. I'd say it's like, interestingly, because me and Danny were also talking about this scene. I definitely understand what you mean, and and I definitely I absolutely take all those points. Although I think it's more that like he realizes that maybe like Ric Flair loves the wrestling lifestyle and he's all about that, and
he's unshackled, isn't he?
Yeah, and then David realizes that actually no, this is all kind of meaningless.
Yeah,
like I actually just love my family, and that's
right,
what I care about.
Yeah, that's interesting.
Because Ric Flair actually, like, as a wrestler, he's considered one of the greatest wrestlers of all time.
Yeah, okay. Yeah.
And he's a very flawed and very problematic individual because he lived the wrestling lifestyle way too much.
Yeah.
But obviously it's not his film, so that's not in there. So, and it is a really... The only problem with it, though, is, and I think me and Danny talked about this as well, the actor playing Ric Flair is actually horrendous.
He's shite.
I've heard this from someone else.
Yeah, really
weird, because
really
I didn't mind him because I don't know who Ric Flair is. So,
dreadful.
But if you it'll be interesting. Maybe after this, we'll show you a clip of Ric Flair. It's almost as if he's never seen Ric Flair before, or he'd just seen a clip of Ric Flair before, like they played the camera, and he's trying to do it. Because it makes sense for the scene actually that he is a bit more subdued. Because if he was more like the actual Ric Flair, I think it would actually be quite distracting.
Okay, yeah.
I didn't mind him in that moment.
In that context,
in the promo,
it works. But in terms of like him actually, his portrayal of Ric Flair, it's like it's well off.
That's really strange because without context, that didn't speak to me at all.
Yeah.
I really loved that scene.
Yeah,
well.
no, but
I like that scene too.
And
Yeah.
just to clarify that, that scene where they're actually like in the locker room is great, and it works in that completely. But there's a little bit before, he's cutting the promo as he's going to the ring, and it's a bit more, and like it's seen as almost like kind of like talking to David on a more spiritual level. It's going for subtlety, and it makes sense in terms of like communicating to the character, but in terms of like Ric Flair, it's actually like it's well off.
Wow, okay.
But but sorry, I think it was a bit of a sidetrack, but that was another thing I needed to get off the chest really. But I think it's also important to obviously add the caveat, like I say these things in terms of like, it's not like the kind of like wrestler that I know, but one of the things about the film is that it isn't just for wrestling fans. This is a way for people to understand it. So there'll be certain things where I'm like, maybe it's not as kind of like accurate, or it's not like that, but I got to also put my kind of film fan, or kind of like your writers kind of head, like this is for people who haven't seen wrestling before, or like don't have as much of an interest, so they just need to get into the story and understand the characters and understand why they're doing this, and not like anything where you talk about real life subjects, like there are always going to be things that are not necessarily the most accurate, or certain liberties taken, but you sometimes need that to make it a bit more palatable for a kind of mass audience.
Yeah.
Just thought I'd add that point.
No, I think it's right to add it, and I think in a way, there is something inherently cinematic in their story and in their arc. And of course, and not only that, but the business of wrestling and the industry, for all the things we've just spent fucking ages talking about, there is something inherently cinematic about that.
Yeah.
And I think you're right to bring those qualms to the table, but I think you're also right to say, well, this is still, you've got to make a narrative out of this.
Yeah.
And you've got to make sense of it all.
I mean,
in a way that fits the sort of, storytelling that needs to be done.
Exactly, within like a 2-hour time frame, and that's why they cut out one of the brothers, was because I think Sean Durkin literally says, like, I don't think the audience can take this.
No,
I don't think, like you were saying about the repetition,
the repetition of trauma, like it feels almost unbelievable.
Yeah.
How, I mean, I'm not saying that in a way that my intention with saying that is not to make light of it. But it almost seems unbelievable that they went through this. Yeah, like I mean, it is.
You don't want it to look like the baseball episode of The Simpsons.
Right. Okay. Yeah. Yeah. Yes. No, you're right.
For lack of better analogy,
quite like that.
Yeah,
if you have kind of like like a lot of it happens enough in the film that they at some there is only so much an audience could take of the same. I think because it seems quite harsh and quite kind of tone deaf to say it, but from a narrative point of view, I don't think you could probably get away with having the same almost repetitive trauma happen again and again and again, and have an audience stick with it.
Yeah,
they do a good job of capturing the essence of the
but
trauma
they do
without being like a.
Is it disrespectful? What is the sort of, because obviously I know the surviving member of the Von Erich family was heavily involved, and he went to the screening, and from what the impression I get, he was quite complimentary about the movie.
I think from what I hear, he obviously, I think, probably had some issues, but he also he's understanding enough, kind of similar to like a film's a film, and if it's told well enough, it's going to make people want to look into it more.
Inspires further research and understanding.
Yeah, and like, you know, to have something like this happen, like, there is unfortunately going to be liberties taken.
You could argue it is, but I think, like you're saying, it promotes the sort of active audiences to look into it more. Maybe it's disrespectful slightly to Chris, but not to the family. I think.
And I think ultimately it'd be up for kind of other members of that family to decide to take offence or not, really, rather than like kind of, I guess, us per se. Like, you know, like, you know, I could understand if somebody did, like, you know, if they had a like family member who found it tasteless and a bit disrespectful. I certainly wouldn't be telling them that they're wrong to think that.
No.
But if David, who was kind of, you know, for a big part, like kind of front and centre of a lot of this, like if he's kind of okay with it, who am I to tell him he's wrong?
Yeah, that's a fair point. And again, the film does adequately service the sort of aforementioned themes that we've discussed about the perils of living under that kind of, through the looming shadow of your father's sort of failures and desires, and the sort of servitude to, you know, a very sort of classically and overtly, you know, masculine patriarch. You know, the film is pretty explicit in covering the sort of trauma and damage as a result of living under that. And I think, you know, and I think from a narrative perspective and a film's perspective, the inclusion of another tragic moment of, you know, pure tragedy is would have been too much. But I just think it's interesting, and I think it speaks more broadly. I think we spoke about this before when discussing sort of Napoleon and biopics. You know, you know, it's a sort of balancing act. You know, you've got to balance the history with, you know, making a story palatable and accessible for a broad audience, and that in itself invites a whole additional layer of debate, which we could have for hours. But I think ultimately, you know, I think the film does a pretty serviceable job with the story it decides to tell. And even if the omission, there is definitely potential for some, you know, quite a lot something problematic about that. I think overall, you know, I think it merits it.
I think so. So the ending won me over. Like,
it didn't win me over.
Interesting. Okay, yeah.
I thought it was naff.
Really, what the bit where
his kid's like, spoilers ahead.
Spoilers. But also, I guess, like, this is based on a true story, so all this happened, so I don't know, how much is it a spoiler when, like, it is based on a true story? I mean, not that, like, everybody you know knows about the Von Erichs. Like, if you go into, like, a workplace, go, oh, you know what happened to the Von Erichs? So who the fuck's the Von Erichs?
I think if we're giving away the emotional crux of the kind of personal story, it might sort of be a spoiler.
I mean, the assumption is with our expansive listener base is that they've either watched the film or they're not that bothered and they don't care.
Yeah.
Spoil away, big boy.
Yeah. And I guess, like, I mean, it doesn't spoil what happens really if it's just the final scene, does it?
No.
You can cry, Daddy.
Yeah. So we see somebody didn't enjoy it. But I think I'm with you, Ben. Because I feel like, it is quite saccharine and it's quite
child acting, like.
But what I will say is what goes on in the film and the amount of tragedy and the amount of sadness and just like the horrible stuff that happens and the kind of sweetness of Zac Efron's character and his family dynamic, I think it warrants it and I think it earns it, so it doesn't feel as corny to me. Like, I understand why people wouldn't like it, but I think it's earned.
Yeah. I feel like for a start, apparently the line "I used to be a brother" was lifted from the documentary.
Oh, really?
Yeah. That's what I've heard. I've not seen it, but that kind of threw me. I liked that line. I used to be a brother because it did sort of. It hammered home the tragedy of the various kinds of suicides. Well, there's a lot of.
It is horrible. I mean, it is. I mean, we were sort of saying earlier, like if this was written by someone and not based on truth, it would be like, this is too much.
Yeah.
The fact that it is real, it is. Yeah. It is just the amount of grief that. You just can't even begin to imagine that kind of grief for a family at all. I actually sort of semi-agree with you.
Yeah.
I don't know. The acting was ropey, I thought. And I thought Efron's performance was, alongside Jeremy Allen White, the star of the show. And that moment just sort of slightly derailed it for me a little bit.
Okay.
But I understand the thematic intention, the basis of what we're going to talk about. The film is, for me, alongside about being in the wrestling industry, it's a cautionary tale, sort of drenching your offspring in the sort of hyper masculinity. Sort of the stiff upper lip, the idea of using physical strength and stoicism to sort of combat all of life's troubles and complications,
and to live vicariously through your offspring as well.
Yes,
like that's a big thing.
Absolutely.
He wants to kind of retain the glory that he had and has now lost. I think it's crucial to understand that that's pretty much what the film's about. But ultimately, that tendency from a sort of fathers to sons is like really quite destructive.
It's a classic thing, isn't it? That sort of thing about you hear about so many parents that live vicariously through their children. The sort of
you have to be better than me.
Please don't make the mistakes. I wanted to be a guitar player and I work at Curry's. Here's a guitar. You'll leave in the house till you play it. I'm assuming that might happen.
I'm assuming that exact scenario has happened.
Tonight's sponsors.
Jordan's no.
No, but I think you're right. The idea of living vicariously through your children and that being something that is potentially incredibly dangerous thing to do. The pressure you put on the children, and you also deprive the children their individuality and their choice to do their own thing and go their own way. One thing I will say that I thought was quite interesting was, and I think was very true to the sort of characterization of all the brothers, is that despite the fact they obviously felt an innate desire to placate their father's imperfections, they were all quite well-rounded young men. It's very supportive of one another, very caring.
Emotionally mature. It's funny what they do with the narrative. They do this thing once, which I was a bit baffled by. Was I can't remember the character, but Jeremy Allen White. After he's committed suicide, they bring him into the living room, and then it cuts to this really weird heaven sequence.
I didn't like that either.
I didn't like that. I thought it was bizarre. I thought there's a line in it where he says, you got the heavyweight title championship in heaven as well. And you're like, what?
This is again where I'm going to step in and disagree with you both.
Okay. You're right,
So, again, I think it earned it. And I think what it was is, I think it was David's perspective of what he sees his brothers doing. In the afterlife.
It cuts back to him straight away, doesn't it?
So I think it's what he's seeing, and it's him, I guess, trying to have some sort of inner peace with it all, and like seeing this kind of idyllic, his brothers just like
reunite,
kind of like like by the lake, having a good time, shooting the shit. His brother's got the belt. Like it again, it's I think a little bit similar to the last scene. It is definitely corny. Like there's it is but I think it also kind of has to do with how it's all shot as well. I think it's all shot quite well and quite kind of like
looks
understated.
Nice.
Like it's not like they haven't done it in the pearly gates of heaven, or like or it's like that bit in Happy Gilmore where they're all kind of waving and like on top of that house with like the
R.I.P. Chuck.
Truck.
say R.I.P. to this guy Chuck that I've never met.
Yeah.
R.I.P. Carl Weathers.
R.I.P.
Yeah,
Carl
of
Weathers.
course, yeah.
What a man. What a
man,
hero.
yeah.
And in many, many ways.
Yeah, 100%.
But yeah, and again, I do understand why you wouldn't like it, and like even if my opinion doesn't change your mind, that's also like that's fine. But like I think again for me, with the amount of trauma that's happened, and you look at it as his outlook on life, not that this has happened. Like it's not, like for me it works.
Okay,
like for me it's like it. You've gone through so much trauma and so much tragedy. Without those kind of saccharine moments, it is just unrelenting, I think, and then it just almost becomes just completely morbid.
I actually think I have one or the other. But I have both.
I understand that as well.
Like I see, I do see where you're coming from in terms of, again, this is a film for mainstream audiences, and you have to think with that sort of storytelling framework in mind. And I think you're absolutely right. Even taking a step back from all of the sort of filmy stuff, just objectively, it's fucking horrible.
Yeah,
really a horrible story. But I think one or the other for me would have been more effective, and I would have been sort of maybe softer on whatever they'd have chosen if
on the inclusion of one. I think leaving the ending, because the ending got me, but I am susceptible to that sort of soapy kind of teary-eyed ending, and I think so for me, if I were to choose, definitely take out the sort of boys in the boat bit. But I can equally. I've spoken to someone else as well about this, and they liked it as well. So again, there's like some polarizing stuff.
Do you think as well that like maybe it's because it's like the boys in the boat sort of thing as well? It's a very kind of like Southern American kind of like idyllic that we not that like
Tom Sawyer.
Yeah, do you feel like as well that like maybe because we are also like cynical Brits that just have we just rainy grey, we love obviously we wish Ken Loach directed this, and and then the other pet kestrel, the kestrel also killed itself.
Maybe we're just not optimistic enough. Maybe that's my problem. I think you are right. I love the idea that there's like another film about an English wrestling family being reviewed by Americans, and they're like, why is at the end of the film are they just like pissing in bottles of Thatchers and drinking it? How does that wrap itself up in a neat sort of narrative package?
I think that's why there's not many rugby films.
That's true. Yeah, that's also true. Yeah.
Also, I think we should talk about Zac Efron.
No, of course, yeah. No, I agree. And we were saying this before, again, over the hot bubbling curry.
Yeah.
I think for him, always felt. I mean, obviously as a teenager, I fucking hated High School Musical, and it was popular to be like, I hate him.
Yeah.
It was always tinged slightly with jealousy, obviously, because he's the archetypal attractive man, isn't he? But I feel like he shares that sort of Daniel Radcliffe, for example. Though I don't think Daniel Radcliffe's the way he has to earn his stripes I don't think he's been as fraught with difficulty as much as Efron has because of being in High School Musical. But these people, they play characters that are set for a certain intended audience, and as many child actors would attest to, or teenage actors,
it's difficult
it's
to move
hard
on.
to move on.
Yeah.
It's a tough fucking mountain to climb. And I think, actors weirdly, I think Radcliffe and Efron are kind of similar in the sense that they've obviously gone big and they've chosen performances they thought, fucking hell, if I'm going to break out of this mould, I've got to do it in a fucking weird way. And I think Radcliffe's ascent has been a bit ropey, whereas I think Efron's course has charted slightly better, I think.
It's been a bit smoother because he's been smart about doing a few kind of indie stuff, but he also embraced comedy a fair bit. But no, I think, and honestly, some people might see it as faint praise, but I don't. But I genuinely think this is probably the best thing Zac Efron's done.
Yeah, he was great as Ted Bundy, but this is probably better.
Without, yeah, absolutely.
High School Musical 3 aside, this is his best role.
Yeah, absolutely.
But what I wanted to...
No, he's brilliant in it. You're
Yeah.
right. He's good.
But what I wanted to talk about actually is it's weird, like, it's a weird, like, might feel like a weird thing to bring up, but his eyes. And I was saying it to you
Ocular
earlier.
boys to ocular men.
That's it. That's the other spin-off. There's so many spin-offs coming out this episode.
We're busy.
Um,
Yeah.
But I feel like he does, like, it's weird to say because obviously he's such a, like, I mean, most people would probably talk about other aspects of how he looks. Like, you know, he's a very good-looking guy. He's very muscular. He's very, like...
Yeah, he's a good-looking bloke.
But I feel like he does a lot of his acting with his eyes. And I feel like...
He's opposite Alan White, who also does a lot of acting with his eyes, so he's probably thinking, this guy can't steal the show.
Yeah, it's an eye off.
But stare off between two fucking owls.
Yeah.
Sexy owls.
But I feel like his eyes completely kind of usually like encapsulate the character he is. Like they almost like they're perfect at projecting what he wants from a performance.
Yeah.
So, like, you know, you'll maybe look at his stuff when he was younger. You look at your High School Musicals, 17 again, and the stuff in that kind of period. And his eyes, I mean, I can't say I watched a lot of that stuff, so, like, but I imagine they probably give off quite dreamy, kind of, like, you know, like...
Help with his sex symbol statement.
Yeah, like, you know...
Very
like,
piercing, very...
Yeah.
But also disarmingly sweet.
And
boyish.
There's an innocence
absolutely.
Yeah.
But then you look at him in what's the title of it? Is it
Shockingly Evil.
Extremely Wicked, Shockingly Evil and Vile.
That's a
Yeah.
shit title.
Yeah, it's not great.
No, it's just, you know, that's the thing. It's just too much of a mouthful. But like, well, yeah, when he's playing Ted
Should call
Bundy,
it Bundy's Holiday.
yeah, that's it. Bundy's Big Adventure. But
That's a better title.
yeah. Breakfast with Bundy. But sorry, back to the point. Yeah. But yeah, when he's playing Ted Bundy, and you look at him in like certain scenes, and especially in the courtroom as well, you look at his eyes.
Yeah.
They're terrifying.
They are.
They are staring into your soul, and like it is believable. He looks psychotic. He looks like he wants to hurt you. He looks like he's dangerous, and it's from the eyes. Like he's got the kind of those dead eyes, just kind of like staring into the back of your soul. Almost a bit Tom Cruisey in a way. Like
Magnolia.
Like, thank you. Magnolia era Cruise.
Yeah. Like very much that, where it's just like it's always soulless. And then you look at his eyes in The Iron Claw, and you do see like whichever kind of like you see that kind of softness, you see that sweetness, like you see doubt, you see all of it, and it's all like, you know, you look away from the kind of like the rest of him, and the eyes, like it's telling you everything. And like I think he's got a real, and I don't think it gets talked about enough, like what he does with his eyes, like it's quite incredible, really.
I think you're right, and it's something, especially in the context, you think of that sort of boyish vulnerability that he obviously deploys to maximum effect in High School Musical. You know, but it works in the context of this film because he is just crying out for someone to let him be vulnerable. You know, as his brothers are. And he is, you know, by whatever sort of otherworldly force or whatever, he is the one that survives.
Yeah, like
he's still crying for it.
Yeah,
in those eyes.
Like he looks like, you know, you look at him like otherwise, like he's like, he's this big muscular kind of beefcake who's
built like a fucking brick shit.
He's like the NWA Texas champion. But you look at his eyes, he's this sweet, nervous little dork who just wants to be hanging out with his brothers.
Like a decent
virgin, isn't it?
Yeah.
Until like kind of half an hour into the film, you're like, really? You can't believe it though, because of the aforementioned sort of facial expression, that sort of puppy dog innocence that he exudes, despite his muscular frame.
Yeah, like you can.
Wish I had that as a virgin.
Like you completely buy it. Like like, you know. I think honestly, for me, this was like it didn't reinvent the wheel in terms of like narrative or anything like that, or biopics, but I mean, I think sometimes if it's done well, why reinvent it? Like this,
I agree.
This story, it's nice to sometimes, but if it's done well, I think it's important to just appreciate it. And I feel like, again, it was tragic. It was sweet and incredible performances all over, except for the guy who played Ric Flair, obviously. Sorry, mate, but you know,
back to the drawing board, pal.
Yeah, I think this is a really solid piece of work, and I personally can't fault too much about it, other than Ric Flair.
I agree. I largely agree with you. I think I'd probably my niggles with it are perhaps a bit more entrenched than yours, but. Yeah, I mean, it's not a film that it's going to stay with me forever necessarily, but as I think you are right, it is a sign that if you stick rigidly to formula and inject enough into it via solid performances, decent visual moments, I think absolutely there's life in it. And I agree with you.
I think
by and large.
I can kind of echo your sort of formulaic sentiment. I think because of the nature of the story and the kind of there's very unfortunate circumstances in the sort of father figure thing. They could have done something more interesting and unusual, especially considering it's A24. But at the same time, like, I mean, it was sort of a Valentine's Day outing for me. So, and I thought it was...
The rest of them would not have been a good Valentine's
Jesus
Day
Christ,
movie.
I'm glad it wasn't that.
No.
There was some sweetness to it, which I appreciated.
Yeah.
So.
And I guess as well, because it's wrestling and not just like another musician biopic or like something like that, where it gets away with it a bit more, because it's not a story told as much in cinema, so you can... buy it. But if it was a musician, you would be like, "Come on, this is just."
Yeah.
How many times have you seen this? I imagine the Amy Winehouse biopic that's coming out. It's going to be. I hate to say it's going to be probably shite.
I've heard great things.
I mean, there's a fucking litany of shit fucking music biopics, isn't there? I mean, even if you think about, I keep going bang. Anytime I can rag on this film, Fear of Everything. Also shit.
Right, outro.
Go on, mate.
Questing the cinematic void.
There we have it then.
I feel like Fritz himself passing the torch on that.
It's nice to start to do that. I always kind of like sort of sink into my chair a little bit, but
really enjoyed it.
Honestly,
that's the most. I think it might be just a combination of wrestling, a good film to talk about. And several Guinnesses, but brilliant.
Nice.
I really enjoyed it.
It's
And thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you, man.
Always a joy.
Thank you for having me, guys. I don't know what it says about me that my episodes have been canon films, Denzel and wrestling.
You're a virile stallion.
Yeah,
Mr. Markham.
That's right. If you need something about kind of hyper masculinity, then I'm your guy.
Hybrid masculinity personified. I've always said it.
The most alpha of males.
100%.
Thanks for coming on, man. It's been wicked. It's always nice to have three
honestly
people
so
on.
much fun.
Thank you for having me, guys. As always, it's a pleasure. You got anything else about hyper masculinity or anything like that? Have me on. I can also talk about other subjects, so I'm not just the guy for
typecast you, haven't we? Inadvertently.
80s vigilante dramas or wrestlers. I can talk about things with more nuance.
Perhaps broaden your horizons, or at least the perception of our audience.
I do watch things with subtitles sometimes.
Death Wish 5 with subtitles doesn't count.
Exactly. So don't have to pay attention to the plot.
It's what punishment. Next week.
Yes, next week.
Again, another episode where me and Ben are not going to be alone.
No.
In fact, this is a bit of a special one, actually, because it's something we've been trying to arrange for a while. Steve Mulhern.
About time.
It's about time. Alex and Chris from the Film Angle are coming on.
Yeah.
Very excited about that. Two people who I admire very much, love their podcast, The Film Angle. please check it out. Don't leave us in the dust, but check theirs out if you can. If you've got enough time,
Listen to one.
listen to ours first, and then go over. But no.
Sorry, whilst I'm here, do you mind if I ask you guys a question? What's it going to be like working with people who are good at making podcasts?
Well, it's funny you should say that, Lee, because in the sort of since we've nailed down the date, we've set up a little WhatsApp, and they've been asking questions, and it is immediately apparent they are far more a well-oiled machine than we are.
Yeah.
So I think we're going to get found out. I think we've already been found out.
Oh man, yeah.
I think they're looking at our responses, our vague, uncertain responses. And they're just like, he's fucking absolute amateurs.
My imposter syndrome was through the roof.
We
got described as a third world podcast.
Well, I just want to let you guys know that if the episode with those guys doesn't go too well, shout out to you guys as well. I love you and love your podcast as well. But if things don't go well, perhaps some sort of tag team match on the undercard of my title match against Marvin Rees, Dizzy Rascal, Siri,
and
CEO of Frankie and Benny's, Stephen Mulhern.
Yeah.
We're all in there.
Royal Rumble.
Basically, it's a Royal Rumble. It's the Cabot Circus Rumble. Anyone who wants to get involved.
We could be the undercard fight.
Yeah.
Me and you versus Chris and Alex.
Oh, that'd be good, yeah.
For podcast supremacy.
Yeah. Cineboys versus...
Supremacy?
Yeah.
Supremacy.
Maybe I'll get my English teacher on, and they're in the match as well, actually, for teaching me such terrible grammar. Making me barely illiterate.
Bludgeoner with a dictionary.
Yeah.
Very much looking forward to the episode anyway.
Absolutely, yeah.
Even if they are clearly far more prepared than we're going to be. And it's going to be revealed to you all. We really are going to be shattering the illusions of professionalism on Centre Boys to Centre Men, I think, next episode. But all that aside, really looking forward to it.
Yeah, man.
So can't wait for that. In the meantime, thank you very much for listening.
Yeah,
Thanks again to Lee.
Thank you, mate.
Thank you.
And see you later.
See you
in the next
soon.
one. Love you lots. Bye-bye.